The most common associations with the term conservative are quite negative. People tend to associate it with narrow-mindedness and selfishness. So, someone scoring low on the Big Five trait of openness, meaning preferring a stable and predictable environment and not being very keen on new experiences. A bit of a boring person, so to speak. Or conservatism is seen as a form of selfishness, having wealth, power and status and rigidly maintaining the status quo to keep it that way. An ugly reluctance to share resources with the less fortunate. Furthermore, sometimes sticking to the old is seen as a kind of snobism. Look at me, knowing all the classical text and music, having the taste of the old nobility, and, thank God, I'm not as vulgar as you are. This way, it is a device of putting other people down and uplifting yourself at their expense. So, conservatism has a bad name. I hope this video will change it, at least a bit. To make it clear, for me conservatism is something completely different. It's a positive thing. This episode is about explaining conservatism as a valid, moral superior and above all rational and fact-based view on reality. It's above all firmly based in evolutionary thinking. Realize this: old systems that made it to modern times have proven to be robust, successful, useful, adaptive and in most cases supportive for individuals and communities. If not, they would have perished away a long time ago. Newly invented innovations and ideas, on the other hand, have yet to prove themselves, and chances they will do so are slim at best. We know 99% of all biological species that have ever lived have become extinct by now. 98% of startups and new businesses have gone bankrupt after only 1 or a few years. Just a tiny fraction of books written is published, and an even smaller fraction of this will sell well, and an even infinite smaller part of that really grows into bestsellers. The same for music and other art forms. In brainstorming sessions, most ideas looked at it with hindsight, prove useless. Only a tiny fraction really adds something to solving the problem. Progressives often make the mistake to think a new idea is a good idea, mostly because it looks so appealing, nice and flashy. Fact is, however, in majority of cases it is not so. So if I had to bet, I would put my money on a proven system instead of an unproven one. Most people will agree with this obvious fact, but are nonetheless mesmerized by any new fad promoted with enough spark and enthusiasm. The new always attracts our attention, so we get lured into the idea it's good too. Also because, however there's no proof it works, neither is there at this moment proof it does not work. We wrongly give it the benefit of the doubt. And saying you like novelty sounds much more sexy than proclaiming you are a conservative. Therefore, to make a statement, I proclaim I'm a conservative, and I'm proud of it. Conservatives have to fight this problem of the modern age. Modern times are plagued by the idea that the new is always better. Progress seems to be the default option. It has become some kind of demigod, an idol, for which we seem to want to sacrifice anything. According to the eminent philosopher Karl Popper, communism and fascism are the two big, what I call, design ideologies, meaning these are thought out by a philosopher in his armchair and then carelessly dropped into the world. And then they caused the biggest massacres of the last few centuries. I only have to name Hitler, Stalin, Mao and Pol Pot. These ideologies were invented, constructed at a desk and mindlessly thrown into reality because they look so nice and were, according to the proponents, capable of solving all the problems we were facing. With hindsight, they couldn't be more wrong. Dropping untested ideas into practice is never a good idea. So instead of revolutions, Popper became a fervent proponent of evolutions. Piecemeal engineering, he called it, making change in careful little steps, implementing small new changing, testing out each little step, see how they work out, and only in case of successful progress, make the step toward the next little innovation. This way, serious yet undiscovered flaws in the design can cause only minor troubles and are detected in an early stage, in contrast to the huge troubles fascism and communism have caused. Everyone acknowledges nowadays that ecosystems are highly complex and sometimes chaotic systems. Carelessly changing or removing one or more elements can have disastrous consequences. This is also known as the butterfly effect. You never know how things work out, so you better be careful with hasty interventions. Social and economic systems are complex and highly chaotic systems as well. But here the realization not to overhaste has barely become an all-accepted conviction, especially with intellectuals, so with those with no skin in the game themselves. In an earlier video, I mentioned the case of Sri Lanka. To please Western countries and NGOs, the government switched overnight to so-called sustainable agriculture and banned pesticides, herbicides and artificial fertilizer. The results? Failed crops, one after the other, near famines, economic recession and heated civil unrest because food prices exploded. Jordan Peterson coined the phrase "clean up your room", meaning before starting to make changes in big systems, prove you are capable of managing smaller systems, like yourself, your immediate environment, your job, your relationships or community. As so often, ancient wisdom coded in religious texts warns us for these kinds of hubris. When man wants too much, when he thinks reality, also known as God, has no limits, he finds himself in a dire straits. Icarus was punished for flying too high. Job's friends made the claim they knew Job had done something wrong in an awful way, otherwise God wouldn't punish him so severely. But by saying so, Job's friends pretended to know how exactly reality functions, and that in itself is a kind of hubris. Being humble is the safest and the best option. Both the right and the left tilt toward hubris, but each on their own way. The right has problems respecting the boundaries of our external nature. The left has problems respecting the boundaries of our internal nature. We cannot endlessly exploit natural resources and dump toxic waste in our environment. The fish population has limits and denying climate change is a very dangerous and stupid option. So we better accept the boundaries of our natural environment. Capitalism and free markets are in itself good systems, but they have to be limited by moral systems, responsible behavior and scientific facts. You cannot dig too deep, too greedy. The left, on the other hand, thinks our inner nature is infinitely malleable. Most prominently, we see this in the gender debate, the trans ideology, and on the nature-nurture discussion on male-female differences. For an in-depth discussion on this, view my episodes 6, 7 and 37. As evolutionary thinkers, for us it will be clear by now there is much more nature than the left wants to admit. On itself, it wouldn't be a problem, you might react. Let them have their own ideas, even if they are wrong. Well, it's not that simple. If you think something you perceive as an injustice doesn't change, it means some people in powerful positions have decided not to change it. So they are to blame and you can rightly be angry at them. In an article I once wrote, I stated anger is the default emotional state of radical feminists. They blame males for not changing, ignoring the bare fact that their possibilities to change are very limited. So, if on the other hand you acknowledge certain things are as they are, it is not on humans to change them, it's much easier to have an open and accepting mind towards this. In healthy societies, left-wing and right-wing, progressive and conservative powers are in a kind of dynamic balance. We need both of them. So my point here is not to ignore or cancel left-wing voices, but to clarify some of their dynamics and to put things in a broader perspective. As an evolutionary thinker, I will lean, however, a bit more to the conservative side, and I think there is a balance to be restored. To my opinion, the turmoil of the 60s deeply influenced left-wing thinking and made them the default or dominant ideology, especially in institutions like universities and the media. After World War II, there was a deep felt need for change, especially among the younger generations. But this change came too slow, too late, too little. Of course, as always, the younger generations want more change than the older generations. But in this century they had the edge, maybe a bit too much. Religion was in decline, wealth grew, and media made it possible to spread information on a scale and speed never seen before. All elements for a perfect storm. And change there came, in huge amounts. But did it work out as intended? Partly, of course. But we can also make a clear case in many ways it didn't. Sexual liberation ended, for example, in porn and prostitution. The liberation of women led to a new crisis with boys and men. See episode 24. Mind-enhancing drugs meant to explore new and unknown state of consciousness, in the end created miserable junks and lethal addictions, with all the social destruction that came with it. Grand-scale educational renewal, in most cases based on ideology instead of on science, fact and reason, led to dropouts, staggering inequality, and cohorts of children not mastering the most basic skills of reading, writing and arithmetic. Note that all these cases the experimentational started in the rich, intellectual and privileged upper classes. Their intentions were always noble, but the ultimate effects on the other hand turned out disastrous, especially for the low social-economic strata with less mental abilities and resources to cope with the hidden dangers involved. Rob Henderson talked about luxury beliefs, attitudes and opinions you can adhere and proclaim because you are in a comfortable position. They will not harm you personally. It's always easy to preach dangerous change when you have no skin in the game yourself. Where did this all come from? Why did it happen in the West in this day and age? I think it's a kind of marker of the endgame of a cultural evolution the West is involved in. A growth and trend that has reached and maybe surpassed its optimal point. As explained in episode 12 and 36, some unique features of Western culture are its emphasis on liberalism, individualism, tolerance and rationality. And like every feature taken to extremes can become a pitfall, so have these cultural elements that made us so successful. Maybe they have grown out of really healthy proportions. If we are too liberal and too tolerant, allow every individual to have his own truth, as postmodernism proclaims, and bow for every critique on our culture, this may have come to a point it is no longer helpful, but mainly harmful. The left, especially the woke factions of it, say we must go on this way, tolerate anything, all else will lead us to doom. I say no. We have to realize one cycle of development is completed and new challenges await us, and that is to find a new balance between openness and closeness, permeability and impermeability of our systems, receptivity versus maintaining boundaries. Francis Fukuyama proclaimed the end of history. To me, he is wrong. We just entered a new phase of history, one that will determine our future and our identity. And conservatism to me has the best cards for a healthy solution. So by all means, try to avoid the manic toxic options pushed by the woke about self-blame, white, male or cis supremacy, or white privilege and white guilt. Of course, we have to realize and acknowledge the bad things of our past, like slavery, but do not in an overzealous striving destroy the many good things of our culture. Neither is it healthy to have disdain for the past. Like Tim Stanley says, thinking about our ancestors, they were all superstitious, ignorant and dead by 40. As explained in my video about religion, all traditions contain very valuable insights and information for modern generations. Furthermore, we should always acknowledge that most modern blessings are built on old structures. So to start with, let's again be proud on the Western culture, the best in any way you can define it in all of history. We should honor the past, not in a dogmatic way, because then it becomes fundamentalism, not in a nostalgic way, being a way to escape from, denying modern burdens and challenges, but to see conservatism as a deep-felt sense of being part of a longer tradition, of something valuable that transcends you. What advice does appeal to you most? Live as it is your last day, or live as if you will live another 1,000 years? I think the second one is the only ethical one. Take care of your world. strive to make it a better place, preserve our treasures and natural resources, build sustainable sources of energy, meaning based on sun, wind and nuclear energy. If not you, knowing your children and children's will live here for 1,000 years. In one of my first videos, episode 4 and 5, we talked about innovations always being the result of the involvement of many people over longer stretches of time, and that the idea of the solitary genius is more of a myth than a fact-based reality. We are indoctrinated to see ourselves primarily as individuals, as isolated atoms. A better metaphor would be to consider ourselves as bees in a beehive, as subsystems in a bigger supersystems, as a link in a chain reaching from a distant past to a distant future. There are a number of institutions that are under attack and need special attention, for they are the core bedrocks of our society. First of all, there is the nuclear family. Even though most of us grew up in a nuclear family, it's taken too much for granted and its structures is under severe attack from different sides. Think of BLM. They no longer see the nuclear family as the core unit and instead want to rely on systems like extended families and communities in raising kids. I do agree with the fact that these can and should be important contributors, but it doesn't legitimize downplaying the essential role of the two biological parents in this endeavor. Especially the black community in the USA has suffered tremendously from the absence of fathers in the upbringing of kids. Especially boys suffer heavily on the absence of a male role model nearby, as do the absent fathers, robbed from their central meaningful role in life. In the Netherlands, there's a small but radical group of activists who want a family to be able to consist of more than two adult persons. Besides that this would legitimize polygamy, this is totally unnecessary and weakens what should be the core of the nuclear family, a married man and wife being the parents of the children. Again, it is a blessing for a family when grandparents, family, friends and neighbors participate in the upbringing of children, as was the case in most of our time as hunter-gatherers. But this always on a voluntary basis, and better it is not translated into enforceable legal rules, simply because there is no valid reason for doing so. There should be clear gender roles. There are two sexes, that's a biological fact, and even young children know instinctively the difference between male and female and the sex they themselves belong to. No need to blur this. Does this mean I oppose the rights of LGBT people? Not at all. We should grant individual autonomy as much as possible. After all, this is one of the cornerstones of our successful Western culture. But we should acknowledge what is the norm, the default option, and what are the variations around this solid core. According to two sexes, it would be a travesty, no punch meant, if we were not allowed to name the two sexes for what they are, and would be forced to compelled speech with regard to new and mostly unfounded pronouns. Another topic is education. We should find the right balance in the ever-growing feminization of, for instance, our educational systems. And emancipation of the gender should never mean that males should become a kind of females. How weird, for example, when the woke loudly applauded for Prince Harry openly expresses his feelings on TV, because men should deal with emotions the same way as women do, in contrast to the deadening silence on the fact him being a pilot in the Afghan war, risking his life and limb for country and liberty. Of course, sometimes divorce is the only option left. Glad we left the times marriage should derange in a lifelong imprisonment, toxic for the couple as well as for their kids. But maybe consumerism has contaminated our most intimate relationships too much. If you don't like it, just leave it, throw it away, just like a purchased item you bought and don't like anymore. Divorce as a get-out clause. Maybe convenient for the grown-ups, it's not for the children. It's a traumatizing, all-penetrating sign, namely, love is not so robust as little children thought it was, and realize that's a devastating experience, changing their whole outlook on life. Stable marriage is above all a protection of the future of our society. People different from one another. Evolution has created groups consisting of individuals with a marked variety of talents, skills and values. This leads to division of labor, horizontal as well as vertical. Human groups always organize in hierarchies, not hierarchies of power as Marxists and the woke proclaim, but hierarchies of competence. We obey the instructions of the most competent group member, because this will give us the most benefits too. In hunter-gatherer groups, as in for example friend groups, leadership is not fixed, but changes accordingly to the challenges we face. Conservatives acknowledge individual differences and the positive effects it has. This in sharp contrast with the woke and the DIE clan, diversity, inclusion and equity. DIE supporters say they value diversity, but this only on a limited number of variables, like ethnicity and sexual orientation. On values and opinions, they strive for a deadening monoculture. If you do not support DIE goals, you are morally inferior, and diversity in skills and talents are denounced as illusions, the result of oppression, or as fabricated social constructs. They believe differences in, for example, talents are the result of suppressive educational systems. And as soon as we give everybody equal opportunities, everyone can become any profession he, she or them wants to be. Differences between the sexes are non-existent in their views, or the results of patriarchal oppression. They deny hierarchies can serve any positive goal. Because individual differences are absent or just illusionary, progressives in essence strive toward one global culture, economy and value system. A perfect example of this is the European Union, extracting ever more power from countries, regions and nation states and transferring it to Brussels. The left focuses on both extremes of the scale, the individual and the supranational governing entities. Conservatives put their faith on smaller units, on family, community, village and region, and less on the systems below and above this. This way, countries remain quilt patches of groups and value systems, real diversity, and we saw in episode 12 on effective cultures, decentralized decision making is one of the core ingredients of this. Globalist forces can only result in monocultures, and in the long run that is a dead-end street, as we have learned. Hierarchies in smaller groups, think of groups of friends or our far ancestors as hunter-gatherers, always start as hierarchies of competence. As Bonobo showed, one dominant aggressive male is no match for a well-organized band of dedicated females. So power based on big muscles has never been the primal force in the way we organize ourselves. This of course changed when agriculture, cities, technology entered the stage. From then on, leadership changed and chiefs, kings and emperors emerged. But still, systems based purely on raw power and the threat of violence are not stable. There's always a kind of reciprocity needed. You obey your lord, but he has the obligation to protect you and help you out in times of natural disasters, plagues or famines. Noblesse oblige. Doing so, societies became stable systems. But alas, even this system is under the threat of woke and the extreme left. How many times news media give compliments to prime ministers, ministers of states, members of parliament or CEOs of big corporations? Most of the time the tone is nagging, negative and destructive. What motivates people to enter politics nowadays, you might ask yourself, the rewards being mainly negative. We all too easily see what they have done wrong, but often seem blind for the benefits and positive change they provide. In the past, people in high places received respect and gratitude. We honored them and in return they worked hard for us. But these forms of rewards are almost annihilated in modern culture. Only monetary reward is left. So don't be surprised when people in high places adapt their behavior according to the only reward system that is left. We have created them ourselves. So if you want better politicians, show some gratitude. Conservatism is not only about the now, it's about the now, the future and the past. More precisely, the longer future and the longer past. It's about conserving what is good and beneficial to ensure a bright future. So conservatism is nothing to do with laissez-faire capitalism, about unbound consumerism, or short-sighted selfishness. Its core idea is about conserving the best, and this is manifested in many aspects of conservatism, as for example the respect for competence, seniority, traditions and proven concepts. Nowadays, we seem to live in a culture of overdrive, for example in the way we are worshipping youth. And this goes further than wanting to look young physically. We seem to believe youngsters have knowledge and wisdom older people seem to lack, resulting in what comedian Tyler Fisher called "we treat adults like children and children like adults." How strange it is we let young children decide about changing their gender with highly invasive, irreversible and sometimes dangerous interventions. How strange we declare a 16-year-old girl with diagnosed mental problems as the leading figure in one of the biggest current issues, climate change. In Holland, there was a fierce discussion to grant voting rights to 16-year-olds. After all, it's their future we are deciding about. By the way, this discussion soon ceased when polls showed most 16-year-olds would vote right-wing instead of left-wing. So much for principles, not. But it's a sign of the times. We think being young is the same as being wise, with a contrapoint in the older, white, strail, Western male as the pinnacle of dumbness. By the way, I don't believe for one moment Greta got her ideas all by herself. I suspect she's the instrument of ambitious parents, them being artists themselves, now seeking for attention by means of their daughter. It's a coincidence all her actions come from the first school strike on were professional recorded by professional filmmakers and distributed by well-designed marketing and publicity campaigns. And Greta is not the only example. There are many cases grown-up have discovered that pushing children to the forefront makes it much easier to sell your ideologies. For a staggering example, see the link in the video below. What is the cause of this? Children themselves are inherently conservative, so they didn't start this process. Children games go sometimes back for centuries unchanged. Kids want to master skills, not change the world. After all, how could they? Kids want to be like slightly elder children and copy their behavior in every little detail, as shown in episode 29 of this YouTube channel. So the bare fact they got more freedom cannot explain the current situation. I think two more things are playing a big role in this. First of all is the diminishing role and impact of grandparents in raising kids. In most of our history, we lived in a structure of extended families. This slowed down change made too hasty, because the multiple generations and the wider circle of relatives were heavily involved, and they weeded out every silly idea modern internet servers take for truth. This corrective system stresses the preservation of traditions worth maintaining. The next factor is the changing role of parents themselves. The thinking of Judith Riss Harris in her book The Nurture Assumption learned that the contribution of parents to the opinions and ideas of children is under normal circumstances quite limited. Children are conservative, elderly people too. Adults are the most change-driven, especially in their young adulthood. Marx, Hitler, Foucault, Derrida, or name any woke ideologues were not in their puberty when they came up with their ideas, but in their early adulthood. Because in the old system the parental impact on kids was relatively low, the speed of change in these groups was too. But this has all changed the last few decades, as Haidt and Lukianov showed in their amazing book The Culling of the American Mind. Kids spend, for example, considerable less time outside unsupervised playing with peers. The time, however, pushy helicopter parents stamp their mark on their kids has dramatically increased. Then there is the content of media, for example TV, created especially for children. Don't let yourself be fooled. This is not about what kids like, but what parents think the kids should like. So it's much more ideology ingrained than it used to be. Kids are seduced and sometimes even forced to adopt opinions of grown-ups, and these many more than the ideas in other age brackets. Therefore, some ideological systems evolved in an irrespectable, fast and hideous way. I think Greta Thunberg is an example of this. We should be more aware of the long-term consequences of this. As discussed in the recent episode on the evolution of religion, we base our moral decisions on 6 different fundamentals. Hyde's investigation showed a clear division on which people prefer to use which fundamentals. Weird people, that is, people from Western educated, industrialized, rich and democratic countries, primarily choose the first three ones, while non-weird people, and conservatives belong to this category, use all six. For them, loyalty, hierarchy and sanctity play as big a role as care, autonomy and fairness. Progressive people seldom recognize the richness of this and are less well capable really understanding conservative people. The other way around, conservative people do understand the way progressives feel and reason. Why? Because conservatives use the moral rules of progressives too, while the other way around it's not the case. Progressives have a blind spot in their moral reasoning. Conservatives have not. Think about that. I hope this episode has convinced you conservatism is a valid and rational way of viewing the world. Being conservative doesn't necessarily mean you are a fan of Trump or Orban, nor does it make you a climate denier or against LGBT rights. It's not that you are against change or deny sometimes urgency to do so. Conservatism is in essence about the speed of change, the quality of it, and the notion to be careful with tradition. Old systems have become old for a good reason. So, when you are really an evolutionary thinker, you automatically end up being a conservative. No escape possible. Progressive ideas and conservative ideas have to be in balance. Sometimes the one will dominate, at other moments the other one will. But always there has to be an honest, rational and fact-based discussion, and neither side should challenge or silence the other one. And that's my biggest hope, the restoration of honest dialogue. So thanks for watching again, see you on my next video, and don't forget to like and subscribe.